Today is a very solemn day, as you may well believe. And in this particular ceremony, one of the primary things we do is worship the wood of the cross upon which our salvation hung. And I'd like to look at that concept of the cross because it's throughout the Bible in a few places. I think it's 4 times in the Proverbs and once in Revelation. And that is the concept of the tree of life, that the cross is the tree of life. Now, it's easy to say that, but it's harder to comprehend that. Now, remember, the tree of life was one of the 2 trees in the Garden of Eden. And it was one that God said you can eat freely from it. Well, he didn't say that. He just didn't put it on, say you couldn't eat from it. But of course, they ate from the tree that he told them not to eat on. And so by choosing the wrong tree, they weren't showing a very good sense of obedience. And again, that's one of the things we heard in the gospel. And the cross is everywhere in this day and age. I mean, people who wear it around their necks, on their clothes, tattooed on their bodies. And yet I often wonder how many of those people really believe what that cross stands for, because it really is a very profound thing. And we make the sign of the cross numerous times during the day, particularly when we come to church, but also many other times. In Matthew 16:24, Jesus told us, "If anyone wants to come with me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." That's a pretty heavy statement. Have you ever taken time to reflect on what it means to take up the cross? The cross has been compared, as I said, to the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. And this is found, as I said, in Proverbs. It tells us that the tree of life is wisdom. But it's hard to see wisdom as the instrument of torture and death. So how do we bring this together? Well, let's look at wisdom. Our faith calls us to follow the way of God. And the Lady Wisdom in Proverbs tells us that's the way we live our lives. And if we do that, we will find peace, we will find happiness, and we'll be able to move on in life. We must understand, though, that God does not work the way we would expect or like God to work. And I'm sure there are many times in our lives when we sit there and say, "Oh God, I'm in a hurry. Make sure all the streetlights are green when I come to them." And of course, some of them aren't. And you sit there and say, "God, you're not listening to me." And God says, "I'm working on my own way, not your way." But God is wisdom, and it's not our wisdom, it's God's wisdom. And we really need to get our hands around with it because it's not an easy thing to understand. I mean, look at it. We have theologians that are writing numerous articles about what wisdom is and what the theology is. And yet we in this room, me included, have a hard time getting our hands around all of that they've written. And so wisdom is something we need to take personally, take into our hearts, feel the presence of God in all that we do. And wisdom looks at what should be and not what is. And I say that it challenges us, the common understanding. And I'm sure you've watched the news and sat there and say, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." It may not have been, but at least for you at that particular moment, it was not the brightest thing you heard. It may not have been understanding. And so how do we deal with that? Wisdom seeks a better way. And so when those people that may disagree with us, they may actually have a better way. We just have to take time to reflect on what they're saying, how they're saying it, and then decide, is that the way I want to go? Is that what God is calling me to do? And sometimes the answer will still be no, it won't be. But we need to take the time to think about it and pray about it and get our hands around it. And in the gospel, I think they show 3 elements of wisdom. And one is truth. And I find that exchange between Jesus and Pilate so intriguing when Jesus said, "The people who know the truth follow me." And Pilate says, "What is truth?" And I think we see constantly in the newspapers, on television, arguments about what is truth, what is happening to our country or what's not happening to our country, what's happening to the environment or what's not happening to the environment. And the list can go on and on and on. What is truth? And again, this is something we need to pray about. And when we reflect on the cross and on Jesus on the cross, Jesus, what do you want me to think? How do you want me to believe? What do you want me to believe? And another interesting thing in the gospel is who had the power in that gospel, Pilate or Jesus? Pilate tells him, I have the power to do this, to whatever I want with your life. And Jesus said, you would have no power if it was not given to you from above. That probably went right over Pilate's head, and he didn't understand anything that Jesus was talking about. And that's something we need to consider. What is the power in our life? What is the great power? What is it that moves us? What is it that gets us up in the morning and go to work? And to a great extent, that power is meaning in life, meaning and purpose. Why are we here? What am I supposed to do? Oh God, where am I supposed to go today? Who do you want me to meet, and who do you want me to serve? That's the power. And wisdom is a liberation. And in Viktor Frankl's book, The Man's Search for Meaning, and Viktor Frankl, if you don't know the story, and probably most of you do, was in a concentration camp during World War II. And he said there's a difference between freedom and liberty. He was not free in the prison camp, but he had the liberty to do things for others that he didn't have to do. He could give a crust of bread to somebody who needed it more than he did. And I think this is something that Jesus is dealing with. He is at liberty to give his life for the redemption of the world. He was free probably to give it up. Well, he probably wasn't. Pilate had arrested him and he was no longer physically free, but he had the liberty to proceed on. And in fairness to Jesus, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he could very easily have gotten off and taken off and left because he knew it was coming and he wasn't sure he really wanted to go through with it. But he had the liberty to proceed with this. The elements of the wisdom of the cross we must take up. Wisdom is knowing what God wants for us. And each one of us probably has a different mission in life. And sometimes you may do something, you may see somebody, or you may do something and you're sitting there saying, God sent me here for that person. Or God told me to be here to do something. And that's our purpose in life. Determining truth. The hardest thing, I think, in this whole thing is what is truth? And we must speak truth to power. And this is where we stand up for what is right in the world, in our country, in our community, probably even in our parish. What is right, and speak truth to power and hope that power listens to you. Sometimes they do. Most of the time, I'm not so sure. And be a voice for those who have no voice, for those on the margin, those who have no representation in Congress or in the State House, people who are struggling on a day-to-day basis and can't make it from their ends to meet. Jesus died on the cross because he spoke truth to power, the power of the religious and political elites. For him, this was the liberation not be confined by public opinion on the ways of the leaders, but to serve all, especially those who had no voice and no one's to speak for them. This is the wisdom of the cross.